Hello and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your daily dose of the latest news, rumours and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Wednesday, September 7th, and I'm your host Harry. Now, you might be wondering, I've already given you a spoiler-free review and a full spoiler review of episodes 1 and 2. Could I really have more to say about the opening episodes of The Rings of Power? Well, the answer is yes. And in order to give you the most interesting breakdown of these episodes possible, I knew I had to bring on a guest each week to join me for the discussion. And so it was my absolute pleasure to be rejoined by our first ever guest from this podcast, the truly wonderful Anna, MyElessar on Twitter. Anna is one of my favourite people on Tolkien Twitter, and our first conversation was just such a joy that I knew we needed to bring her back. This breakdown of the first two episodes covers everything from our favourite storylines, our theories about some of the mysteries the show is giving us, and where we think episode 3 and beyond might be going. But I know some of you have asked me to go more in depth into what I haven't liked about the show so far, and you'll be pleased to hear that Anna and I give our fair but honest critiques of scenes or moments that didn't work for us. I should preface this episode by saying that neither of us are Tolkien scholars or claim to be lore experts. We're just two passionate fans who love this world. But I know that there are many other content creators out there who can give you that minutiae of lore referencing. So hopefully you'll enjoy our discussion all the same. It was a lot of fun for us. However, before we get into the episode, we must begin as always with a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from The Lord of the Rings, Book 6, The Steward and the King. Then the guards stepped forward, and Faramir opened the casket, and he held up an ancient crown. It was shaped like the helms of the guards of the citadel, save that it was loftier, and it was all white, and the wings at either side were wrought of pearl and silver in the likeness of the wings of a seabird, for it was the emblem of kings who came over the sea. And 7 gems of adamant were set in the circlet, and upon its summit was set a single jewel, the light of which went up like a flame. Then Aragorn took the crown, and held it up, and said, Ete Arelio endorena utulien, sinome marovan a hildinya, tenambar meta. And those were the words that Elendil spoke when he came up out of the sea on the wings of the wind. Out of the great sea to Middle-earth I am come. In this place will I abide, and my heirs, unto the ending of the world. Thank you to Anna for choosing that reading for today's podcast. As you'll soon discover, if you didn't already know, Anna has, well, let's just say it's a little bit of a special place in her heart for both Aragorn and now Elendil. Now, let's get into our breakdown of these first two episodes with Anna. So, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome back to the show Anna, MyElessar. Thank you so much for coming back. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on again. I'm glad that I didn't scare you away from having me as a guest again.
No. Well, for those of you who might not have followed the podcast for a while, Anna was my first guest. She very generously came on about a month before the season started. And so back then, all we could do was speculate and wonder and discuss. But now we find ourselves in a very different position, don't we?
Very different indeed. It doesn't feel real that we've actually seen the first 2 episodes.
Exactly. And I should say, before we get into discussing the episodes themselves, and for everyone listening, we're going to do a deep dive into the episodes, talk about things we loved, things we liked, and we're going to talk about things we didn't like, and we're also going to look ahead to the rest of season 1 from episode 3 and beyond. But before we get into talking about the episodes, Anna, obviously both you and I were lucky enough to attend the world premiere in London. Well, I guess it was last week, technically, wasn't it? So talk about that experience. How was that for you? And maybe we can share a few stories.
Well, honestly, the main takeaway, apart from seeing the actual show, is meeting not only you, but a few of our other friends who we met through Tolkien Twitter and talking about the Rings of Power, which was incredible because it was such an amazing atmosphere there, and sharing it with people that we've been speculating and getting excited about the show with was so lovely. And it was lovely to meet you.
Yes, no, well, lovely to meet you as well, and the rest of our mutual Twitter friends. I thought it was a wonderful day. So nice to meet some of the cast. I know you got to speak with some of the cast, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I did meet Lloyd. Don't think I mentioned that anywhere. But
Not at all, no.
that was just wonderful because the cast of this show particularly, they've been hit with such a crazy pressure because Tolkien fans are so incredibly hard to please, and it was just nice to meet them all, and you could tell that they felt the excitement from everyone, and it was nice to just let them know how excited we were and let them know that we're rooting for them, for their characters. I think there were a few cast members who were surprised that a lot of us not only recognised them but were talking about their characters with them. They were like, wow. And it was just so lovely to see, because I think we forget that we're kind of here at the start of this show. Like, this is the biggest show in the world and it's just starting, and I know a lot of people have described this as like the breakout roles for a lot of these actors, and it's really cool to see them getting there and beginning their career, because they were all so lovely to meet. Though I will say, when I met Lloyd, I panicked a little bit at first, and the first thing I said to him was, I was like, I'm really excited to meet you, I love Aragorn. And in my head I was like, did you just say Aragorn? You did. So I backtracked and I was like, what? Because I like Aragorn, I love Elendil too. And yeah, it was lovely. Even though we didn't see him really, it was just nice to let everyone know
No.
how much we were looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, I agree with you. The cast were absolutely lovely. I got to speak with a few of them myself. Will Fletcher, who plays Finrod, was an absolute delight. And I was standing next to Maisie Matilda, who a lot of you may know from Tolkien TikTok and Instagram, who paints these beautiful four-edge paintings on books. And she got many of the cast to sign them, and getting to watch Morvith Clark and Maxim Baldry, who plays Isildur, get to meet her and see the book. And they're such, kind, lovely people. And as you said, I think it was really nice for them to get to meet all the fans and see how excited we all were. And obviously from our side, we got to watch the episodes in a huge cinema, so maybe we had an all right time too.
Yeah, that was incredible. And a lot can be said for how Amazon handled the whole ticket release process for the, special fan screenings. I think it was so incredible to see it on the big screen, because a lot of the scenes you could feel and you felt like you were there. And I will get into that more when I talk about the bits that I really liked. I haven't actually rewatched the episode yet, because I'm waiting till just before the third one drops to rewatch them, because I want to get back into, the feel. But I don't know if it would have had that same impact if I'd watched it for the first time alone by myself at home. But if you've rewatched them, did they have a similar impact?
So you haven't watched them since the premiere?
I haven't, no.
Oh my. Well, I have to say, I would have never invited you on, Anna, if I'd known this. This is disgraceful, and this will be your last appearance on the podcast. Yes, I have watched them since. I didn't stay up. I took a quick 4-hour nap and then woke up at 2 a.m. to watch them on the night, just because I wanted to be involved with all the conversation on Twitter. And then I've rewatched a lot of scenes since, and I finally rewatched them again for a third time, or I should say rewatched them for a second time not last night, it was Saturday night. I got to rewatch it with some of my family, which was a wonderful experience. And so I've seen it now 3 times. Was it different watching it at home? In some ways, I weirdly preferred watching it at home. And I say that because in the theatre I was so overwhelmed by the experience. I'd just met the cast, we'd been around the red carpet area, I was surrounded by, 500 Tolkien fans in this huge IMAX theatre, and I was almost just taking it in as an emotional experience, but I got to appreciate some of the scenes a lot more once I was just sitting at home in the calm of my living room watching it on a TV. So I do think it's a very different experience, but obviously I would have never said no to seeing it on the big screen either.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that I haven't rewatched scenes, because anyone who follows my Twitter knows that I've been like non-stop tweeting about it. I just haven't done the full run through because I've been waiting till, if I'm gonna do an all-nighter, for the third episode, I'm gonna do kind of a marathon of the first two and then just go straight into the third. I kind of want that whole journey.
Yeah, in that case, you can come back on as a guest, I guess. That's fine. I accept that as an answer. But no, I totally get what you mean about rewatching scenes. And I think now that we've kind of, teased people for a few minutes about what we're going to be talking about and saying how much we liked different scenes now, Anna, I want to start off with your big picture point of view, because I've talked a lot about on the podcast over the last 2 episodes about my thoughts. And I want to remind you of something. When we had our last episode where you came on, one of the last questions I asked you was, what are you most worried about? Is there a storyline character? And your answer was very interesting. It wasn't a storyline. It wasn't a character. I don't know if you remember this, but you said, my biggest worry is that it's just not going to be good and that I'm just going to be terribly disappointed by it all. So I think I have to start with the big question. Were you disappointed?
Absolutely not. I don't know how you could be disappointed by that. It was just so, the main thing that I wanted from it was to feel like I was back not only in Middle Earth but back in a Tolkien story, and that's exactly how I felt. It was so grand. The characters were so lovely and fun to watch. I came out of the cinema, and I think me and the people I was with, we just kind of looked at each other, and we were running around London oh my god, that was incredible, that was amazing. And I think I did, when I was on the podcast last time, I said that I was too young to experience the original trilogy when it came out, so I never had that this is Middle Earth, I'm seeing it on the big screen for the first time, seeing places for the first time, and I felt like I did have that experience. I'm kind of an emotive person in general, but there were moments when I was audibly gasping, and I was laughing, and I was getting teary, and maybe that was just me, but I was feeling so many emotions, and that's all that I wanted from it, and it definitely didn't disappoint.
Well, that is what I was hoping to hear. I mean, I'm sure that's what I was expecting to hear as well. But I think that was it for me as well. It was the wave of emotions. It wasn't, I had fairly high expectations, obviously, going into it, but what I found was that it was a much more emotional experience for me than I'd even anticipated. And like you said, there were moments I laughed, cried, smiled, gripped the arms of my seat in the cinema, in mild terror. So I really went through the whole emotional roller coaster. And so now that we've established that you did like it, which, what a relief. Thanks for coming on the podcast and saying that you liked it. We can now confirm we are both shills, unpaid ones, unfortunately. What were some of your standout, whether it was scenes, storylines? Let's get into what some of your favourite parts of the first 2 episodes were.
Okay, well, the first thing that I audibly gasped at, and I had a visceral reaction, I think I grabbed the person sitting next to me and I was was when it was the prologue. Galadriel was narrating, and she says, but some resisted, a band of elves went into Middle Earth. It goes over this shot of the map, which I thought was really good. They didn't look like the original maps, but I like how they've redesigned them. And then you just cut to this shot of, I think, an eagle and a dragon or a fell beast just fighting. The eagle's on fire. It slams into the ground in this huge battle. I gasped it. I wasn't expecting it. It was just so epic, I think is the only way I can describe it. And there were so many shots from just the prologue that stuck out to me so much, and it was just absolutely insane.
Yeah, no, the prologue was a real moment of eye-opening for me, where I didn't know what to expect going in. I think I probably went in expecting, a very Fellowship of the Ring style prologue where it would, we would get in the beginning there was the Valar, la la la, we have Morgoth and the trees, then we have the Exile and the War of Wrath. But what I found really interesting, and this is maybe less about the scale of things, was how much the show was trying to tell us the thematic beats of the storyline. That opening scene with Galadriel and Finrod talking about how to find the light, how to follow the light. That for me was really interesting, and I think it was a good choice, and I've said this on the podcast before, I think it was a really good choice not to try and tell the whole story of the First Age, and instead try to show what it meant to people and what it would mean to people going forward. And so I agree with you, those huge epic moments were massive for me, but funnily enough for me, the thing that sticks out for me at the prologue is that scene of Finrod and Galadriel sitting on the tree stump and having that conversation. It was a really impactful scene for me.
Yeah, the thing is, I will get into this when we talk about things I didn't like, and I'm not one of those, elves can't have short hair people. I'm still not a huge fan of what they did to Finrod's hair, but he was that good. Will Fletcher was that good in the role that I didn't care. I didn't even notice it when I was watching. It was only in retrospect. But he must have had about 5 minutes or even less of screen time, and I was so emotional over him. I already had that pre-existing emotion from the book, but I was like choked up. I was like, no, come back to us, please. Yeah. And he was just so good. And even the young Galadriel, they just had such a good connection for the short amount of time that they were on that I think they just set up the whole episode perfectly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Will Fletcher nailed that feeling of someone who is incredibly good and incredibly kind, but as we know from the books, and in terms of our first kind of lore deep dive of this episode, the point I wanted to raise was when Finrod says to Galadriel, "I won't always be here." That is really what they've done there, is taken a line from the books where Galadriel, much later in the First Age, asks Finrod, "Oh, why aren't you going to have any kids?" And he says, well, he doesn't say this, but basically prophecy and foresight comes upon him, and he says, I'm going to have to go into darkness, and nothing of my realm will endure that a son should inherit. And so it's really beautiful, I thought, how they reused something from the Silmarillion that they couldn't depict, but used it to show that emotional connection between the kind of brother and sister, and I thought that was really impactful.
Yeah, it reminds me of kind of Peter Jackson's tendency to take lines that wouldn't be particularly used in that context by that character, but the way he used them just worked really well in the context of the films. That it doesn't really matter when the quote was picked out from or when that particular moment was. It just worked really well to set up, because it was quite a soft beginning, all these children kind of playing and bullying in Valinor, all of a sudden switching to this like insane moment where even Sauron appeared, which is not what I was expecting.
Oh my god.
The first few moments of the first episode, with his theme in the background, I was like, is this real? I don't know how I was expecting them to kind of show him to us. I was expecting him to be eased in a bit, but I'm not mad about the way they did it. I think the shot as well looked incredible with him like coming down the stairs.
It was really interesting as well. They've clearly taken Peter Jackson's design of Sauron as an influence, but actually the more I've looked at that shot of him, there are quite a lot of subtle differences. What I've coined the cat ears, which are the little pointy bits sticking out from the side of Sauron's head. That's new, which I quite like as a reference to Tolkien's original idea of Sauron as a cat, as Tevildo. That's a really cute reference. But also, I thought in terms of size, that was the other thing that shocked me. They made him, I don't know how tall he's meant to be in that shot, but he looked, 12 feet tall.
Yeah, he looked not only tall, but he looked a lot more slender than he did in the films, because in the films he's got this like huge hulking armor on, and he does still have it on in the show, but he looks a lot more, I'm not going to say thin, but he looks smaller, and I think that was quite impactful.
Yeah.
He wasn't always this huge, menacing villain. That wasn't always what was scary about him.
No, and I think the fact that hopefully the show is going to lean into this idea of him as a sorcerer, a shapeshifter. I mean, what I thought was really interesting was that they referred to him as a sorcerer as well, which people who read the books know that's a big part of Sauron's character. He is, a dark and evil spirit, in essence, in the same way that Gandalf and the wizards are spirits of good. Sauron is a spirit of evil, or a spirit that has been corrupted to be evil. But because of this, he has the power to shapeshift. He has power through his voice. And so I think it's really interesting the show's leaning into that side of it rather than any other aspect. But we should probably move off the prologue before we spend the whole episode about the prologue. What were some of your favorites, or what was your... Let's start somewhere simple. What was your favorite storyline across the first 2 episodes, and why?
My favorite storyline has to be Elrond with the dwarves. I mean, they were all... I don't think there was one that I was bored by, but that one, I think it was mainly because it was the one I was anticipating the most. I was thrilled to see Khazad-dûm with the theme. Just the shots of them walking through was just amazing. And I think a lot of people I know came out of it like Amazon made the dwarves the comedic relief race again. And I disagree completely. Having a few jokes is a part of who they are, but they nailed the power completely because Elrond was completely out of his element, surrounded by all the dwarves. They had all the power in that situation, and I just loved the chemistry between him and Durin. Elrond trying to figure out why he's angry at him, Durin trying to kind of maintain this anger while you can tell that he just wants his friend back. And then you had Deezer come in to kind of bridge the gap between the two, and all the actors had the most incredible chemistry, and I was just smiling the whole time. It was just such a lovely storyline to follow.
It really was, and I think what was amazing about it was how they were able to weave in these kind of deeper moments, both in terms of the lore, but also in terms of the emotional moments. For me, the scene I've probably rewatched more than anything, and it's a very short scene, is the scene of Elrond and Durin on the lift as they've finished the contest, and Elrond, and something I haven't touched on in my review, but something I want to say is how skillful Elrond is as a politician, because I think it's very easy to watch those episodes and say, well, Elrond actually fails every time he tries to do something. And he does in a way, but he always finds very smart ways, such as when he first can't get in, he, invokes this ancient right. And then when he's in the contest and he realizes he's probably going to lose anyway, but what he doesn't do is he doesn't fail to break a rock. He puts the hammer down and kind of gracefully accepts surrender. And then later when he's in the dinner scene with Disa and Durin, he offers to leave. What I love about it is they're building Elrond's character, and I remember we were all discussing this on Twitter when they first released a description for Elrond in the Vanity Fair article as a politician, and everyone was like, "Oh, I don't really like that. Why is Elrond being a grimy politician?" But I think what they're actually showing is he's a diplomat, he's a negotiator, he's someone who's trying to build friendships and alliances, and I thought they did a really good job of showing that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of relates back to his first scene as well. When you have the elves come up to him and say, "We want to inform you that you won't be coming to the dinner because only elf lords are invited." And I think it might have been you that said, is that because he's Elrond half-elven, that he's not invited to that, and maybe that's why he's kind of trying to build himself up in other ways. And that just kind of speaks to Robert Aramayo, I think, because I've said before, I think that was one of the first things I tweeted when I came out of the cinema. But I mean, the whole cast were incredible, but he just stood out to me completely because he felt so... I don't know what I was expecting from young Elrond. I didn't have too much in my mind of what I wanted him to be, but somehow he captured it completely. He got his relationships with everyone, Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, Durin. He had to establish these relationships with really important characters, and he did them all within the first 2 episodes, and they all worked so well for me. They felt so natural, and he was just incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I loved was that almost every scene you got with Elrond, you found out, if you weren't a book reader who's read all the books and knows everything about Elrond, you got a little bit of information about him in each scene. So, like you say, that opening scene, you found out, well, he's actually not an elf lord. Then with his conversations with Galadriel, you find out, okay, well, he clearly very much admires her and he, is her friend, but he's balancing this role with the High King. Then during the ceremony scene, you see that actually he was writing the speech. And that was such an adorable scene, him mouthing along. It was almost like something out of the West Wing. But then later with Celebrimbor, we got almost that sense where he's obviously got this very complicated relationship with Celebrimbor's family. And for those who haven't read the books, Celebrimbor was essentially raised by... Elrond was essentially raised by Celebrimbor's uncles after those same uncles drove his parents out of Middle-earth, and attempted to kill his mother, in fact, unsuccessfully. But so there's this very complicated relationship Elrond has with everyone. And one of the things I wasn't expecting was that to then carry over to the dwarves. But I liked that the scene with Durin where Durin talked about him missing his life and his own mortality, which is obviously one of the central themes the show is trying to explore. For me, why that got to me so much is because I was thinking, this is probably the first time since Elrond's own brother died, because his brother chose to become immortal, that he's had to deal with this idea that actually his time with one of his close friends or family is precious. And so it really got to me because I thought Elrond has probably spent a good few hundred years not thinking about, the choice his brother made, and then suddenly his best friend is reminding him that he can live his life however he wants, but the mortal races don't have that grace.
Yeah, and it really kind of drove it home with, I think, my favourite scene between Elrond and Durin was the scene where he kind of notices the tree that has grown, and I can't remember the exact quote, but it really choked me up and I wasn't expecting it. He said something about, where there's, if there's a home full of love, anything can grow, something like that. It was lovely.
Yeah, because Disa's saying that, Durin raised it, and she says, people made fun of Durin for thinking that. They said, how could it ever grow in such darkness? And then Elrond says, where there is love, it is never truly dark, which is just pure Tolkien. When people are like, oh, the show isn't Tolkien, that is a message that Tolkien 1,000% would have got behind. And also, I just kind of got the vibe, I was like, really? This is Disa says it's his third child, but, I was talking about this on Twitter yesterday, there's fraternal love there. They are in many ways closer than friends. They are like family. And I think it's so lovely that the show is embracing that idea that you can love a friend so much that your lives become intertwined, and with that comes all the pain and the suffering and the loss, but you also get the beauty of it. So I agree. I thought that was just absolutely charming.
Yeah, that was one of the things I loved most about the Jackson films was that, and even the books in general, they just put such a focus on platonic love. And there are obviously romantic relationships happening, but they don't really take the foreground. They're all on the same level of importance. One isn't bigger than the other. Friendships and brotherhood, in quotes, are incredibly important.
Yeah. And so I want to, before we move on from Elrond and the dwarves, because we obviously, as we're looking ahead to episode 3, here's the big question about the Elrond and the dwarves storyline. What's in the box?
It's got to be Mithril, right? I heard someone say that it was the Arkenstone, but I've got my mind so set on Mithril that I'm like, no. Come on.
I agree. We've seen clips in the trailer where Durin's holding up some shiny metal and saying this could be the beginning of the new era. We know that obviously Mithril becomes very important for the dwarves and leads to their downfall in some ways, but also the thing I was thinking was, I think it's the ring of power that Galadriel wears has Mithril as it's either made of Mithril or Mithril as part of the gemstone. So I get the feeling that's obviously going to play into this whole Celebrimbor building his tower, building his forge, and if you'll allow me a brief segue into Celebrimbor side talk, and I know this is really just for me. This is just for me. But I read a great theory on Twitter yesterday, and I want to get your view and want to see what the listeners think. Someone suggested, and I'll have to go back and I think it was actually Tea with Tolkien suggested this, because someone said, why does Celebrimbor say I need this tower and this forge completed by spring? And I was kind of like, I don't know, Celebrimbor's pretty vain. He probably just wants it done quickly because he's impatient. But T suggested that maybe Anatar, that is Sauron in disguise, is already been in Eregion and is influencing him. What do you think of that theory, that Anatar's already been there?
I love that theory. I like the idea that we're not going to see him coming in, but that he's going to have been working in the background for longer than we can see, and that he's like already manipulating things behind the scenes, and by the time we're introduced to the characters, they're already in too deep. I like this idea that he thinks this is his thing. Elrond's, getting ready to get it done by spring, but in the background you've got Sauron working on it, especially after they've just sent Galadriel away. I really like that theory.
Yeah, I like it too. I think the only thing I would miss if that were true is that I like the part of the books, and I think it's in the Silmarillion, it might be in the appendices as well, where Sauron, in his fair Anatar form, goes first to Lindon, and he's rejected by Gil-galad and Elrond. And I would still like to see that, because I would like that idea that, and there's a great line from the books where Anatar's saying to Celebrimbor, he says, Gil-galad is wise and a good king, but I don't understand why, he won't let me help him. But you are truly good, and you will definitely, want my help. And so I'd miss that a little bit, but I also, like you say, it would be such a good way to end season 8 with that kind of rug pull moment where, like, actually, you were all looking everywhere for him, and he's already under the floorboards, so to speak. I love that idea.
Yeah, because as much as that would be great, anyone who's read the books and anyone who can kind of just see would kind of know who it is. And what I wanted from Sauron or Anatar was that mystery. I kind of want to be deceived alongside the elves in a way.
Yes.
I want to be shocked when I find out who it is, even if it's not someone we've seen before. I just want to have that moment where I'm like, oh my goodness, this is Sauron.
Yeah, and me too. I would love that, because I think that makes it better for the book readers. And one thing I just want to say, and this is just another point for me, because we are in this episode talking about things we didn't like. I am still in two minds about the fact that it's Elrond who suggests they go to the dwarves. Because in the books, Celebrimbor is the one who has this long-standing alliance with the dwarves. Now, I get why they've done it, because Celebrimbor is not going to make it through all 5 seasons, and you want to have this connection between Elrond and Durin. It's going to come important later. But I didn't like that has been removed. Now, my hope is that by the end of season 1, we're going to have Celebrimbor, because of this alliance that's being built, working with the dwarves, maybe crafting the doors of Durin that the Fellowship will later come to with Na'vi. But I will say, when I saw that, I was a little bit disappointed. But it's a small thing. It's a really small thing.
Yeah, as a big Celebrimbor fan, I can see why that would be a thing, because it's kind of, I get why they did it, but they could have worked around this and still built up the relationships, I think. Even just, did they make a comment about his relationship with them? Like I said, I've only watched these through once. Yeah, I do remember like a comment, but I can't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah, so when we cut from Eregion to Celebrimbor and Elrond walking up to the West Gate, which is not the doors of Durin that the Fellowship will find, because it's all inscribed with Dwarvish runes rather than Tengwar, the Elvish alphabet. He says that he's admired the dwarves. He admires their craft. He has this beautiful line about the way they tend to the rock like a child cares for an aging parent. Lots of great lines. But I don't know yet whether that means he's worked with them in the past. Maybe they used to have a relationship and now it's not working. But it would surprise me if they cut that part out, because the making of the Doors of Durin is a kind of central moment in the Elvish-Dwarvish alliance of the Second Age. It's almost the foundational moment. And so I wonder whether that's what's going to come about as a result, that the dwarves are going to say, okay, we're going to come and help you with your tower, and Celebrimbor as Return is going to say, I am going to build you this, with your craftsman Navi, we're going to build the most incredible, set of doors you've ever seen. So maybe that's what will happen. Again, really small complaint, don't need to dwell on it, but fingers crossed that's still coming. So moving from the Elrond storyline, which I feel like we've covered pretty well, which was the next big storyline that really stuck out to you as a favourite?
On par for me would be Galadriel's journey and Bronwyn and Arondir, but also the Halfwoods. I don't know what rank I would place them in. I know that I had the favourite, which was Elrond's, but I liked the other ones, so I don't really.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I had a second favourite. I would like to talk about the Harfoots, because then we can kind of segue into the Stranger, who I did really want to speak about.
Yes. So talk to me about the Harfoots. Obviously, I know when we talked about it on our last episode, we said we were both excited for it. We both thought they were going to play an important role. Did they meet your expectations, exceed your expectations? What was that like?
They met them completely. From the moment that, these two hunters walked by, and I was kind of surprised because they were in the first ever trailer. I kind of assumed that they would have a bigger role, but they were kind of there to set up the Harfoots. But the moment that those two walked off and the Harfoots just started appearing out of the tall grass, I was just sold. Everything about them was just so lovely, and we did say they would be kind of like the thing to go back to when the darkness of everything else got a bit too much, and that was true, but they weren't just there to be this relief, because they had more of a role than I was expecting. They didn't really interact with any of the other characters, but I felt these stakes when I was watching them. You have the migration, you have Largo break his foot or whatever he did to his foot. I had to look away because that close-up shot of his foot really turned my stomach.
Yeah.
Obviously you have Nori and the Stranger and her dynamic with the rest of the Harfoots, and Sadok especially. I really like the relationship between those two, so I thought they were a really good part of the story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love them. And someone on Twitter pointed out to me a fun little Easter egg that the first Harfoot you see pop up after the hunters go by was actually played by, I think his name's Kieran Shah, who was Frodo's scale double from the original films.
See, I absolutely love him, because every time I think about him, I think about this one behind the scenes moment from The Fellowship of the Ring. You probably will have seen it, but it's my absolute favourite thing in the world. It's when Viggo Mortensen is talking about them being on a boat together. They're out in the middle of the water.
Yes.
He turns around to him and tells him that he can't swim, and Viggo just has a heart attack. It's so funny.
It's a great, I remember that bit. It's one of the great bits of the appendices from the films. But yeah, no, I absolutely love the Harfoots. I thought it was very funny that they dropped in the wolves in episode 1. It was kind of like, not Chekhov's gun, but Chekhov's wolves. They were like, just so you know, these guys are coming back, be worried about them. And then, Largo breaking his foot. I think we need to talk about this. I can't remember who it was, someone made the funniest joke on Twitter. Someone said, what's it going to be like when they have to shoot Largo like a lame horse?
Yeah. I don't know.
I hope it's not going to happen.
That was one of those jokes that you see, and before you laugh, you're just silent, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to laugh at this because it's very sad, but I do wonder whether he's not long for this world. And in terms of the Harfoots, I don't think I have too much to say about the rest of their storyline. Obviously, a lot of it was set up for their culture, which I thought was really interesting. I thought it was great they had a reference to the line that Theoden, I think, says to Merry in the books, where he says, we know little of the hobbits, but we've heard they can disappear in the blink of an eye, and they can mimic the sounds of birds and animals. And the very first scene you see, they have that whistle, which is obviously meant to be a bird, like a hunting call, a bird call. But that was all great, but I think what we need to dive straight into, because time is of the essence, is the Stranger. Where were you before the episodes in terms of who you thought he was going to be, and where are you now?
See, When I say that my brain isn't really wired, I mean it. So
Mm.
when I went into the episodes, I was like, it would be cool if he was Radagast, it would be cool if he was a blue wizard. I'm not as fussed about the Gandalf theory, but there's not one that I'd be particularly annoyed about unless it was Sauron. I still don't like that theory. But I came out of the episode not with much of a, I think this is who it's gonna be. I came out a bit more with a, I think I'm gonna really like this character. I did think I was a bit worried that he'd be put in just as this, oh, you know, is he good, is he bad, kind of thing. But I like the way they've set him up as this kind of lost soul who is clearly very powerful and dangerous, but he doesn't know who he is, how powerful he is, how dangerous he can be. And I thought that scene, first of all, the one of him and Nori, you know, when he first lands, was just incredibly powerful. And then one of the last scenes we saw, which was the fireflies, and he uses
Mm.
them to kind of send this message that he can't speak verbally, and then they all just slowly die. I think it was such a magnificent scene.
It was haunting, and I think each scene where they displayed a different part of his powers was almost led you in a different way. You know, that scene where he gathers all the fire up, you know, that was kind of like, well, is that bad or is it good because he's bringing
Yeah.
in the fire, but then the fire's cold. And then you had the scene where Nori surprises him and he shouts at her. And you know, I thought the visuals there were very reminiscent of Gandalf in Bag End when, you know, he does the "I'm not trying to rob you,"
Yeah.
you know, the shadows pulling in and the angle and everything kind of clawing in. But then the Fireflies scene was like, well, that is kind of reminding me of Gandalf, but it's also got a slightly darker feel to it, and the stars, you know, I've talked about this on Twitter. The constellation doesn't match any of the ones Tolkien describes in his books, so I don't know what it's meant to represent, but I thought it was interesting that Nori said she doesn't know it. And if you think about constellations, if you're say in the northern hemisphere of the world, you will see all the same constellations, but if you're in the southern hemisphere, you'll see different. And I know we could get into the whole, is Tolkien's world flat at this point, which he never really seemed to make up his mind on. But my personal theory about that is that he's trying to get further south and east because he is a blue wizard, and from where they are, the threat would be south anyway. So I kind of like the idea that the constellation is not where he's from or something about him; it's where he wants to go, and that might be south to the east, which maybe I'm just biased because he's a blue wizard. But I think, like you said, regardless of the theory crafting, I'm in love with his character. I think Daniel Wayman is just, you know, he's had like two words and both have been in Quenya, which, you know, we can't understand. And yeah, I'm captivated by him.
Yeah, I really did like the scene as well. It was kind of a little breath that you wouldn't have expected in his storyline. You know, when Nori's trying to communicate with him and she does the "I'm Nori" thing and he just keeps repeating
Yes.
it to her. Yeah. I wasn't expecting a little laugh in that moment, but I think it was quite a nice
Mm.
break from the, oh, he's scary and we don't know who he is. It kind of brought out this kind of human, not human, but you know, it humanized him just a little bit, and we could kind of see why Nori wanted to figure out who he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I agree that scene where he, you know, she licks her fingers after eating the snail. You know, anyone for escargot, and then he doesn't eat but licks his fingers. That was great physical comedy, which I think is sorely missing from a lot of modern TV shows. You know, they go for more like kind of quippy lines, but that kind of physical comedy I love. And I also like that we're very much getting this suggestion that Nori just feels she can't leave him. I found that, you know, that was actually one of the scenes that made me tear up a little bit, was when she was explaining that she just couldn't leave him. She feels responsible. And there's something about that, and I can't even describe it, but I love that sense of the courage of hobbits, the kindness of them. That for me is perfect.
Yeah, I like the balance she has between she can't leave him, but also she doesn't want to leave him, because this is, you know, she's always been a curious hobbit, and we can tell from her interactions with Sadok that she just wants to know so much more about the world, and in her mind this is like her opportunity to do something that she's not used to doing. You know, it's like she said something about he came to me, or something about that this was
Yeah.
meant to happen. And I mean, I feel kind of the same in her in that way. I don't think I would have been able to leave him. You know, if something like that falls into you, especially as like a curious hobbit, it's gonna feel like you have to know what this is. You have to know who he is.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting as well, when I had Kylie on the podcast and we did a whole episode about Harfoots, and this was obviously before the show came out, we talked about the fact that Nori and Poppy are kind of simultaneously drawing upon the Frodo and Sam dynamic, the Merry and Pippin dynamic, but what I actually found the most was that Nori reminded me of Bilbo, but Bilbo after Gandalf has convinced him to go on the adventure, where Bilbo has almost this escalating storyline. He's like a snowball that rolls downhill, and he just keeps gathering momentum and, you know, weight and danger along with it. And that's how I kind of feel about Nori. She has set herself on this path, and I think there's danger in the future. I think there might be death. I think there might be heartbreak, but it's all coming from a place of kindness and love and courage, and I love that. I think it goes back to a core Tolkienian theme. I think it's an interesting character, and I also think what's interesting is she's not reckless for the sake of being reckless. And I think even her actor, Markella Kavanagh, talked about this. She's not reckless just because she wants to be. She thinks that actually the Harfoot culture will be improved if they do. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think you know, you can't have a Tolkien story without a hobbit starting out curious. I want to go on an adventure. I want to see what this is, and ending up as a complete husk of themselves who has to leave Middle Earth.
You found a way to turn that into a very depressing conclusion, but which I admire.
It does. It brings the Gandalf theory more to the front and center because he is the one who tends to put hobbits in these situations.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so moving from there to another storyline, which I think we both might suspect has a tragic ending in its future. What were your main takeaways from the Southland story with Arondir and Bronwyn and Theo? What were your thoughts on that sequence?
I was kind of surprised because I was expecting us to meet Arondir and Bronwyn before they'd met themselves. I don't know why. I thought we would experience their storyline from the start, but I kind of like that we're already in there because the actors sell it so well. Like, you can feel that kind of forbidden love already, whether it is love at this point or not. Just like the glances and the touches and everything, they had such subtle but telling ways of acting that really sold that relationship to me. And I think it's interesting, that storyline, because they took a risk by giving us an entire storyline of original characters, because, you know, there is the risk there that people, especially book readers, people with prior knowledge, might lose interest because, you know, we don't know any of these people. We might not have an emotional connection to them already, but they really pleasantly surprised me. I felt really invested with them, and I think a lot of it was because you could feel the entire time the influence of Sauron over the place they were in, you know, from the people around them, and the way that his theme kept playing over all the different places they were going. It just felt so, their entire plotline felt so foreboding. You know, there's no way everyone's making it out alive. We have Theo walking out at the end to the Sauron theme with his sword. You have Arondir, he's, you know, being kidnapped by this gang of orcs, I assume. Bronwyn, it's kind of on her to get everyone to safety and get everyone to stand and fight. So they've all got such a pressure on them at the moment, and they've left us in a place where I think they might be the one, that storyline I think is the one that I'm most excited to see in episode 3, just because they're all kind of in danger right now. And I guess that is the privilege of having original characters. You know, we know with Galadriel,
Yes.
Elrond, they'll be fine in a mortal sense, you know, they're not going to die. Gil-galad and Elendil, they'll be fine for a while. We've got them for a little bit. But the original characters, you know, they have all the stakes on them. Anything could happen to them.
Yeah, but I totally as well get what you mean about the story not even starting where I expected. For me, it wasn't the love story, which, by the way, I agree with you. I think what was so good about that love story was that it was not told through dialogue. As Arondir says himself, you know, he has said it in every way but words, and you felt that. You felt it when he handed her the seeds. You felt it. I mean, one of my favorite lines is when she hands him the seeds, and then she explains that they crush it to make a paste, and it's the most wood elf thing ever. It's like, you crush them, you know, the horror in his voice. That's one of those moments that made me buy into their dynamic. But what I was surprised by was that I'd assumed we were going to have the orcs attack the village, Arondir maybe rescue Bronwyn and Theo, but in the process get captured, and they flipped it on their heads and they said, oh, no. You know, Arondir almost walks himself into danger, which I love because, A, that's, you know, heroic kind of storytelling, but also it just completely switched in my head where the story was going. As for Theo, I'm still no closer to knowing what the sword is. I think, you know, obviously it's some kind of relic of Sauron, relic of the First Age. I do think it's very interesting that in the very last shot of him in episode 2, as he leans down to blow the candles out, they very clearly give you a close-up shot on his jacket on the left shoulder, and stitched in is some kind of sword emblem. It doesn't look like the sword that he's found, but it appears to be a sword, and I know that Tyro, the actor who plays Theo, has said that the jacket isn't his. He's either I don't think he's specific, but it's clear he's either inherited it maybe from his absentee father, Kof Halbrand, is my personal theory.
Yeah,
but
agree.
There's a lot of mystery. You agree with that theory?
I do. I mean, I don't know for sure how accurate it's going to be, but I do like it as a theory. You know, it would be strange of them to throw this random guy who's fled from the Southlands in on a completely different plot line if he has no immense relevance to this other plot, you know? I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, and we'll get into Halbrand a bit later when we talk about Galadriel, but one of the interesting things I thought was that pendant he seems to wear on the pouch around his neck looked to me like whatever is in the centre, I can't tell whether it was a crown or something, there seemed to be wings on either side like an eagle, and back in the town there was a carving of an eagle. In this case, it was quite a terrifying one because it was an eagle eating a child or a human, and I saw someone on Twitter say something which I really liked, which was, if this was a town that belonged to followers of Morgoth, of course they would see eagles as terrifying, because the eagles were good and would have been attacking Morgoth's forces. So that's like a really cool little visual design thing.
That's really good. There are so many little points. There's so much detail in every single shot that I think even by the end of the season we're still going to be unpacking things from the first episode.
Oh, 100%. And I should give a shout out to, and I know we've both shared their work before, but Wizardway Chris on Twitter, who's been doing translations of all the Elvish, the Dwarvish symbols, names. I'll link them in the episode description, but if you want to, for example, know what's on Celebrimbor's plans for his tower, Chris has translated all of that. Just absolutely fantastic work. One thing I do want to talk about, and I want to get your perspective on this, because we were going to talk about things we didn't like. I didn't, and I talked about this on my review, that I didn't like the fact it seemed that Gil-galad was commanding the Sylvan Elves to disband their tower, because for me that doesn't work from a lore standpoint, the High King of the Noldor commanding the Sylvan Elves. But the thing that actually bothered me, not from a lore standpoint, but from a plot point, was just how quick it was. I didn't like that the elves were like, there 1 minute, gone the next. I felt that was rushed.
Yeah, one of my biggest issues with the episode was the pacing in some parts, and that was one of the time. It felt very much like the end of Game of Thrones. Suddenly they're on one island, suddenly they're like across Westeros, they're somewhere else, with absolutely no indication of how long it took them to get there, how much time has passed. It's like they're in one place, they're in the other. And even just the fact that he commanded them felt a bit, unnecessary. They could have come up with another reason for them to have to leave, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe this is where we should segue talking about Gil-galad and Galadriel's storyline. But yeah, there is a thing for me at the moment where I'm just not quite sure how they're setting up the kind of A, Gil-galad's role, B, the politics of the Elven realms. As I said, like, in the books, for those who might not have read them, Gil-galad is the High King of the Noldor and Lindon and commands all these elves. But the elves of the Woodland Realms, who you may recognise as, Legolas's people from the original trilogy, they are all commanded by what is Legolas's grandfather, Orifer, and they have their own realm and do their own thing, and they are separate from the Noldor in significant ways. So that was an issue. But I'd be interested to hear how you felt about the rest of Gil-galad's portrayal in mainly episode 1, I guess.
I did tweet about this the other day. I had one main issue, and it's not really an issue, it was just a moment that I didn't like. And this is completely despite Benjamin Walker's performance, because he was just exceptional. He was everything that you would expect from a High King. He was good, he had his nice moments, but there was also this, not menacing in the background, but you could feel his
it's like
tension.
Imperious, isn't it? That kind of overpowering.
He just sold that really well. But there was one scene, and it was during the ceremony, where he does this, I come to
do your Benjamin Walker impression.
Absolutely not. And he's like, I come to bring this message, you're going to Valinor, the Grey Havens. He lists off all these names, he's lifting up his arms, and it just took me out of it for a moment. I was like, I don't like this. It feels too, I wouldn't say on the nose, but it's just not, I don't think it fit very well. I think Benjamin Walker did his best with that moment in the script, because I loved the way he delivered it. It was kind of just shy of flamboyant, which I really liked. The way he lifted his arms up, his cape kind of flowed back. He was standing in front of everyone, kind of beckoning over this way.
Yeah.
But the dialogue itself in that moment, I just really didn't like.
Yeah, I had two issues with it, and and as I think we've said, what we're talking about here are pretty minor quibbles across 2 and a bit hours of television. But so my two issues with it, like you say, I think the script there was. I think it's a personal preference thing, right? Like, I just found it a little bit stilted. And the big issue everyone's been talking about on Twitter is how does Gil-galad have the right to give this as a gift? Now, I had the same reaction initially. I was like, hang on, like, the elves can just leave and go to Valinor if they want. But I think there's a couple of interesting ways to look at this. One, if we're talking about the middle of the Second Age, at the end of the First Age, all the elves who remained got given the opportunity to go back to Valinor if they wanted. So anyone could go. The ban of the Valar is lifted, you can return if you want, off you go. So the assumption is that wherever we are in the timeline, which I think is somewhere middle to late Second Age, the assumption here is that if you stayed in Middle-earth, you're staying in Middle-earth. Now, elves did go back over time, but it's not exactly something you can just do. Valinor is still essentially hidden from the rest of the world. It's not, post-Numenor, but it is hidden. And so my thought was, well, maybe this is just the sense that Gil-galad controls Lindon, he controls the Grey Havens through Círdan, so he controls the ships. So the gift is being given a ship and, the right people to sail it, to take it there. But it still doesn't quite sit right with me that that's like a gift he would give. For me, it feels like something that someone would go to Gil-galad and say, I'm weary of Middle-earth, I want to return to Valinor, and he would say, okay, when we next have a ship leave. And in that way, he would grant it. But it wouldn't be something that, like, he would just spring on people, right?
Yeah, it definitely seemed kind of, the way they sprung it into the plot did feel kind of like we need to get Galadriel from here to there. And that was one of my main issues with the pacing, was the way Galadriel's story started out, because I know a lot of it was in the prologue, but it kind of felt like Galadriel's here, now she's here, now she's here, and now she's where we need her to be. And I guess they set up what they needed to set up, and I think there's not many other ways they could have done it, so yeah. I'm being very nitpicky, I guess, but it did feel very much like, okay, they've done what they needed to do. By the way, I'm sending you all off to Valinor on the next ship. Bye. But, I think I can accept that, because the Valinor scene itself was that beautiful that I'm glad we got there eventually.
Stunning. I've talked about this probably on every episode now, but the parallel between the line from Frodo at the end of The Return of the King about the grey rain curtain of the world rolling back, and then them literally going through a golden rain curtain. I mean, that wasn't one of the scenes that made me cry, but it was one of the scenes where I was just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Just stunning.
Yeah, it wasn't. I did tear up at that scene, and it wasn't the particular part of them going into Valinor. It was the moment that Morgoth, as Galadriel, kind of accepts. You can see the moment on her face that she accepts that she can't go into Valinor, and she has that very Peter Jackson-y one tear running down her face, and it's just such. I think what a lot of the actors did so well in this show is the subtle visual acting and not telling everything through the dialogue. You know, we had that flashback to Finrod saying what he whispered to Galadriel earlier, and that was enough for us to know what she was thinking. And then Morgoth just sold it complete with that performance, and I was so choked up at that moment.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful.
It was that, like you say, when she looks to camera, I thought that was just a fantastic piece of directing, fantastic piece of acting. And I should say as well that we had all been speculating for months that Galadriel was going to get shipwrecked. We thought this was going to be part of some story where the Valar denied her entry, they send a storm. And when I first saw her die off the ship, my immediate reaction was, oh, I didn't expect that. And then after I thought about it for 10 minutes, I was like, that is such a smart choice. Make it Galadriel's choice. Make it her choice to return. Give her that agency, but also make it part of her story. So I really love that choice not to have it be a shipwreck. Just fantastic. Do we want to quickly talk about her and Halbrand on the raft before we move on to kind of questions and the rest of the season, predictions, and you get to talk about Elendil?
You know that I have a lot of thoughts about Halbrand, and a lot of the time that I say that I hate him, I am joking. I'm not fond of his character so far. I think a lot of that scene, that storyline we've had so far, felt kind of underutilized. We had her coming onto this shipwreck. It was like a raft full of people, and they were basically gone in an instant. And then it was just Halbrand. I felt like the worm was really underused because that was built up in the trailers to be this really big threat, and Galadriel basically swam away from it. I really thought they could have done a lot more with that. And then, though I do have to admit, when Halbrand first said his line, it was like this snarky thing. I was like, here we go. I looked over at who was next to me, and I was like, look who it is. But there was one moment that I really, really liked, which I wasn't expecting, and it was when Galadriel was sinking, and he comes down the rope, and his theme plays over the top, and I thought that was such a lovely moment. I think they could have built up the distrust between the two more. I think a lot of that was rushed, and I think that scene would have been a lot more of a payoff if we'd got more of the distrust between them. But for what it was a really beautiful scene.
Oh, I agree. And I think, by the way, episode 2, we kind of skipped over this when we talked about pacing. I think episode 2's pacing was better than episode 1 for me. I don't know if you felt the same, but yeah, I agree. That scene where Halbrand, I mean, it's a beautiful shot of her sinking and her theme playing very softly, and then those first violin notes as he comes into frame, it reminded me, of some of my favorite shots. It weirdly reminded me of there's a video game, and this is like dating me back like 8 years or something, or no, 10 years, when I played it in my misspent youth. There was a game called Black Flag, which was a kind of high seas piracy game, and there was a character called Edward Kenway, and Halbrand was giving me, this is really for A listeners who've seen this, but he was giving me big Edward Kenway vibes when he was singing it. And funnily enough, Edward Kenway in the game abandons his wife and children to go out to sea. So that's probably where the comparison ends. But no, that scene of him diving down to rescue her, I think my only point on about how quickly they did the tension, one of the things I'm really hoping is that once they get to Numenor, spoilers for anyone who hasn't worked out where they're going yet, when they get to Numenor, I think they're going to continue that. I don't think it's now going to be a thing that they just trust each other. I don't think we're getting that until, mid to late season.
I hope so. And everyone views things differently. At its core, it's subjective the way you react to a character, and I know that a lot of people already ship Galadriel and Halbrand together, which is not my thing, as I've made very clear, but I can see where they're coming from, because they have that tension, a lot of people are like, wow, enemies to lovers, that kind of thing, but I do hope they play on that distrust a lot more, especially now that we're going to have a lot of other players in, like Muriel, Elendil, Isildur, Ar-Pharazôn. We're going to have all these new characters coming in and disrupting this kind of dynamic that they're kind of building.
Yeah. So before we move on to talking about episode 3 and the rest of the season, we got a couple of questions on Twitter, and there are a couple that kind of that I wanted to raise here. And it's actually about episode 1, but I thought, seeing as we're finishing up here, the question's from Francis, and they ask, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Valinor meteor sequence, that episode 1. Was it climactic enough, or would you have preferred something different?
I really liked it. I thought it was a great way to end the episode, and what I love, and I already knew we were going to get this because of the trailer, but I love that it was kind of an event that for just a moment tied all of the plots together, because we witnessed everyone see the meteor go overhead. And I love stuff like that. It really brought me back to the moment in, I think it's Return of the King, when Sam and Frodo and Gollum are watching this like green light shoot into the air, and then we have Gandalf and Pippin seeing it from a completely different perspective. And I just love that. They were all just kind of tied together for a moment. And then you had two completely different things going on, but I think what I liked about them is that they were two character defining moments. You had Nori decide to stay there, approach the stranger, and then you see his power really for the first time. And then on the other hand, you have Galadriel kind of moving away from this power. So in a sense, they're doing the opposite thing. Nori's going towards something while Galadriel's running away from something. And I think the episode 1 was at its core to set up the rest of the show, and I think what they did with the climax at the end is they set everything up completely, at least for those two storylines, which I thought was really well done. And it was enough to make me hope when I was in the cinema. I was like, please don't give us a break right now. I want to go straight into episode 2.
Yeah, and thankfully they did get us straight into episode 2. I'll just add, I think you summed it up better than I could have. I thought it was a perfect ending sequence. I like you say, the meteor connecting everyone. The Valinor sequence for me is one of my favourite things I've seen already, so I don't really have any complaints there. So we also got a question from Tweet Monkey, who asked, where do you think the series will take us? Now, he ends his question as it concludes. We're not going to talk about where we think the season is going. We've got 5 more weeks to talk about where the season's going to conclude. But Anna, I want to turn this over to you, because I know you're excited about Numenor. I know you're excited about your, let's put it bluntly, your biggest crush, Lloyd Owens, Elendil. I don't think anyone doesn't know this about you already, but if they don't, Anna's got a problem, and the problem is called Lloyd Owen as Elendil. So talk to me, what are you excited about most for episode 3? What are you hoping to see?
Well, listen, what I was hoping to see in the first 2 episodes was Elendil. And I said this to Lloyd Owen, I was like, I'm so excited to see you. And he was like, I'm not in the first 2 episodes. And I was like, so I'm not going to see you on the screen. And he just went, no. So that was me. I was like, great.
He technically lied.
Yeah, we got his shadow. And you know what? That was enough for me. We got his shadow with the Numenor theme over the top. Oh my god, that was just one hint of the theme, and I was like going crazy. So maybe it was a good thing we didn't see the whole thing. But that's just been what I've been looking forward to the most from the start, going to Numenor, seeing Elendil and even Muriel, because these 2 characters I've been so excited to see, because for all that we do know about them, there's just as much that we don't know. and I'm so excited to just kind of dive into them and Numenor as a place, because I know Charlie Vickers, who played Halbrand, he was talking about the Numenor set, and he was talking about how well done it was. It was basically like a city that you could walk through and you felt like you were really there, and I have a feeling that that's going to come across, because most of what we've seen from Numenor so far is just these wide shots, which have been amazing, but it'll be really nice to kind of get this grounded feel of going into it, especially because Galadriel and Halbrand, we're going to be experiencing it with them, kind of through their eyes. And then obviously we've got Elendil and Isildur. First of all, their theme is so underrated. It's one of the best on the entire score. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but
Oh, soundtrack, yeah.
yeah, I'm just so excited. And you know, I do like Elendil as a character, and not just because I have a giant crush on him. He's just so interesting, and it is because in the Lord of the Rings itself, he's kind of this almost mythical figure. He was the first, you know, he was the first king, and he was, you know, Aragorn screams his name while he's jumping into hordes of orcs. And this is kind of how we get to know him, and getting to see him brought to life in in his kind of rise to power. It's just going to be so incredible. And also, I haven't really spoke about Isildur a lot, but I'm very excited to kind of get him portrayed as the tragic character that he is, and not just, oh, I have the ring, I'm not going to destroy the ring. You know, that's going to be really heartbreaking to see build up, and I think Maxim Baldry is going to do an incredible job with that role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think someone, I can't find the question now, but I'm pretty sure someone asked me on Twitter today, you know, how do I think, you know, are they going to show Isildur's weakness, you know, from the start? And I don't think they're going to, because I don't think that's the story Tolkien wrote. I don't think Isildur has some inbuilt weakness. What people need to remember is that Isildur is a hero right up until the moment he isn't. He is quite literally, he pretty much does nothing wrong. I mean, I'm not going to spoil it for people who haven't read the books, but some of the stuff Isildur is going to do in Numenor and then later in Middle-earth, you know, he's a very heroic figure, and his younger brother Anarion is, who sadly it doesn't seem we're going to meet this season, but season 2 is going to be Anarion season. But he's a hero, and I think where we're going to meet him, as Maxime Baldry, who plays Isildur, has said, he's a young man, he's trying to find his way in the world. But I think also, interestingly, what you said about Elendil is very much in an interesting place in his life. The way the show's portraying him, he's recently lost his wife, so he's a widow. He's got 3 children. He's a sea captain. He's a sailor. He's clearly, you know, he has a high position within Numenorean society. And so I'm really interested to see, where does Elendil fit into not only Numenor but the court politics? Does he have the ear of Miriel, but only in a military sense? Does he butt heads with Pharazôn? How is that impacting on his relationship with his son Isildur and his daughter Eärien? All of that is super interesting to me. And then the biggest thing for me, actually, which I haven't thought about until what got me thinking about it, was actually the last shot where he appears as a shadow of Galadriel. Now, Elendil's name means elf friend, and now this is a little bit of Tolkien just being like, well, this is the character's purpose in my book, so that is the name I am going to give him, which they're obviously not going to be able to explain in the show, but I want to see why he is elf friend. You know, I want to know why Elendil has this relationship with Gil-galad later down the line. So, you know, I'm really excited to see what his interactions with Galadriel are going to be like, and hopefully we know there's going to be a scene of them riding down a beach and then in a library somewhere. I really want to know what that's going to be about.
Yeah, well, Gil-galad and Elendil is one of the relationships I'm most excited to see in the show, and it's going to be a slow process getting there, I think, but I'm just incredibly excited to see that. And, you know, they essentially end together, so it's going to be really good to kind of see the build up to that one moment, which is essentially what the entire show is leading to in a way. But I do think his relationship with Galadriel is going to be really interesting. We've had, you know, a few shots of them together, but I don't think enough to tell exactly what, one, their dynamic is going to be, and two, what they're going to be doing together plot wise, because we've seen moments of Galadriel trying to convince Muriel to fight. You know, they were looking into the Palantir together. So we kind of get the gist of what's going on there, but Elendil, we've just kind of seen them together with not much of a sense of what they're doing.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And actually, you've just reminded me, I wanted to ask you about this and you've jogged my memory. So before I went into the show, I thought that Galadriel's Palantir scenes were going to be flashbacks to the First Age, because that's the way they kind of edit it in the trailer. But it's very clear to me now that that's not the case. So my question is, what the hell is Galadriel going to see in the Palantir? I have no idea. I don't know if you have any ideas.
See, I had hoped that it was going to be at least partly this scene where everything is just bathed in red. And it's interesting because I always thought that was going to be related to the scene where she gets up, everything's red around her. But then again, as you said last time, actually no, I think it might have been when we did the space together, that could be something to do with Mordor down the line. And I do think this shot, you know, this stark red shot of all these bodies floating, it was so underused. It was on there for about 2 seconds, and it would have been great if that had been the first time we'd seen it. That would have been a shock.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have mattered how long it was on screen. But we'd seen it so many times in the trailers, and it was such a, like, it stuck out to so many people that it was kind of gutting that it was just used as this 2-second flashback.
Yeah, well, that's where I think, like, you know, I kind of want to, you know, criticize the show, but then I'm also like, this is also just us who've been poring over every second of footage for like 3 months, you know.
I mean, my biggest complaint is that it was such a good shot that I wish we had it more. So at its core, I'm criticizing it for being that good.
Too good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm just happy because the very first time I saw it, I was like, that's definitely the sinking of Beleriand. And it basically was the sinking of Beleriand. So I'm taking that as a win for me, because so many of my other theories that I probably talked about with you on our last episode, I'm not going back to listen because I don't want to see how wrong I was. But so many of my theories were just dashed in the first 2 episodes that I'm kind of excited because I'm like, I've got no idea where it's going. And it's like with Galadriel in the Palantir, could we get another Finrod flashback? Could we get something from the future? Could we get something about Anatar and Sauron? I have no idea, but I'm so curious.
Yeah, no, more Finrod is definitely something I wouldn't complain about. I hope we see more of Will Fletcher as Finrod in any way that we can.
Oh, definitely. I mean, literally the day after the show aired, I was like petitioning for us to have a Finrod spin-off with Will Fletcher. I would absolutely love that. Apart from the Numenor storyline, what are you most looking forward to seeing, or what would you like to see in episode 3? We're probably not going to get, you know, Gil-galad or Celebrimbor, so we're probably looking at the Southlands, Harfoots, maybe some Elrond and Dwarves. What would you like to see from episode 3?
The thing that I liked the most and actually liked the least, which is weird, about the Southlands plot was this one scene with the orc and Theo and Bronwyn.
You didn't like
I'm going to
that
go in
scene?
with the bit that I didn't. No, I did and I didn't. And I'm going to go in the
Okay.
bit that I didn't like about it, and it kind of leads to the pacing, because it very much felt like no one believes Bronwyn, no one's on her side. She goes home, they get attacked, everyone believes her, everyone
Yes.
leaves. So that kind of felt a bit rushed to me. But the scene itself was absolutely amazing. Like, I wasn't expecting such a tense scene. It felt like something out of a horror film, and I mean that as like a really big compliment, because I was completely on the edge of my seat the entire time. And the design of that orc was so horrific, but in the best way. Like, it was hairy and disgusting, and it had this mask on that it ripped off at one point, and it was just like the way it was kind of crawling but running at the same time. It was just such an incredible design. And so that leads me on to what I'm most excited to see, which is hopefully a lot more of the orcs now that Arondir is with them, and like in that sense Adar as well, because we've had pretty much nothing from him so far. He's probably what I'm most excited to see next, apart from Melendil, obviously.
I love that you had to slip that in there. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree about the orc scene and his design. I'll say it again, J.A. Barona's first ever feature film is a horror film called, well, it's a Spanish film called El Orfanto, but in English is The Orphanage. It's a very scary film, and I'm not a big horror person, but it's a great film. And it was great to see him bring that horror pedigree. But I really agree about the orcs and Adar, and something that I actually want to talk about was, this isn't a criticism, but it's a concern. I'm worried that we haven't met our season 1 villain yet. Now, part of me thinks, okay, maybe this means that Adar and the Mystics are going to be in season 2 as well. That would be very interesting to me if they're not just one season villains. I would like that, I think. But if they are going to be one season villains, as far as I'm concerned, they both need to be introduced in episode 3, because it's an 8-episode season, and I don't want to be introduced to a villain halfway through the season, episode 4, episode 5, for them to get, clapped off the face of the earth in episode 8. Like, that's not interesting to me. So, but I do think we're going to meet Adar next episode, because we know that Arondir is being taken to this orc camp. We know we've seen scenes of, we've at least seen his back and his hand there. So fingers crossed we are going to meet Adar next.
Yeah, that actually, what you referenced then, is one of my favourite shots from any of the trailers, where we're kind of panning on him from behind. You kind of see his arm down by his side, and all the orcs with all these horrible masks on just bow to him and kind of cower away at the same time. One of my favourite shots we've got. But yeah, I agree. I think, and I'm not saying every show or every film has to abide by these rules, but the season 1 villain, if that's all he will be, needs to be a threat from the start, because right now we don't know if any of our other characters know about him. We don't know where he is, who he's going to interact with. At this point he poses no threat to anyone, because we've not seen him once. So I do hope that kind of dragged into the next season, even the priestesses as well. And let me just say that Breedy Sisson, absolutely loveliest person in the world.
So nice. We were for listeners, myself and Anna were in different parts of the premiere holding pens, fan pens, but we both met Breedy Sisson separately, and just the nicest person, so lovely. I know they've been interacting with fans on social media since, on Instagram. I know they've been sharing art and stuff, and just so lovely. But no, I agree. I hope Adar comes in soon. The only thing that's making me feel okay about it is that really the orcs are the extension of Adar, right? So the fact we've already had that threat established does reassure me that he's next on the chopping block.
Yeah, I do think they're going to lead us to, that's probably their role, to take us to him.
Yeah, narratively, I think you're exactly right. Is there anything else that we haven't covered, whether about the first 2 episodes or your expectations for episode 3, 4, that's on your mind?
One thing I did want to talk about, and this is specifically after a certain person made a tweet yesterday, I think a lot of people, not a lot of people that I've spoken to, thankfully, have gone into this show with the idea that every character is black and white, and that for some reason who they are now is who they're going to be for the entire time that we're seeing them. But what I think this has done is set up every character that we've seen so far in such an incredible way. We know who they are now, and we know what they want to be and why they need to change. And I think we see that specifically in Galadriel, because someone tweeted, she's the only kind, brave, smart character, and that's such a narrow view to have of her, because that's absolutely not how she was set up to be, and this is with all the love in my heart for Galadriel. She's selfish and she's stubborn, and she has such a narrow mind for her goal that's
Amen.
what she needs to change and get rid of that. And that's not a bad thing that she's selfish, because we're going to see her unlearn it and collaborate with others the way she couldn't with her own company. And, that's
Yeah.
what the 5 seasons are for her to get to point A or point B. If she starts out as kind and brave and smart, then she doesn't need to change, and we don't need a story, really.
Yeah, and I know we haven't spent much time talking about Galadriel on this episode, partly because I've talked a lot about her on previous episodes, and there's been so much said that I don't think we need to retread the storyline. But I think your point is actually so key, and it goes for everyone, as you said. If you've watched 2 episodes of a show, you haven't seen someone's whole character, let alone their character arc. And, that I want to just repeat what you said. Galadriel in the books is arrogant. She's she's quite prejudiced a lot of the time. She looks down a lot of people. She thinks she knows best. She's actively confrontational in many moments. And we have to go, as you said, from that place. And I talked about this months ago, and I was so glad to be proven right. I'm not gloating, but the scene with Galadriel and Elrond was all about trauma and loss, and it was beautiful. Favorite scene in the show, maybe. But my point is that Galadriel has this huge journey to go on. So people asking about where's Celeborn, I may not care for Celeborn, whatever, but I do understand that he is going to form part of this journey of her realizing she can't solve the pain and loss by fighting. She finds it by preserving and healing and loving, and that's where her character's going. And it's going to be other characters are going to go in the opposite direction. Elrond is going to realize he has to forge his own destiny. He cannot just build it through Gil-galad, Celebrimbor. He is going to have to become his own lord in his own right. And, Isildur, Elendil, they're all going to go through these journeys. And all I would say to people is you can't judge what a character arc is from 2 episodes. And you can't judge where they're going to be. And you can't judge the sum total of their personality. And what I liked was that the showrunners clearly have a bold vision, and they didn't feel the need to make Galadriel, in a perfect, flawless person. She has flaws, and I like that we've seen that already.
Yeah, there was a really good quote, and I might butcher it now. I watched a few clips of an interview that Morpeth did, where she talks about how do you portray naivety in someone that's lived for thousands of years, because they're not going to be naive. And she says that in Galadriel she portrays that through arrogance. She's not naive, but she's so arrogant. She thinks that what she's doing is the only way and the only right way. And it's not just Galadriel, obviously. There's all these different characters. We have Nori, who's so curious that it's kind of her Hamasha, it's gonna lead her to obviously a lot of pain down the line, and she's gonna need to learn how to balance her curiosity with her life. If she was set up without a character arc, she would have just left the stranger. That's every character, I think, in fiction starts out with something that they need to change, and that's what drives them throughout a story, which is, I think, one of my favourite things that we've seen through the show so far, is that the characters don't feel fully realised yet, but it feels like they will be. Like you said, the showrunners clearly have a bold vision, and they've started in a place where they don't feel like they need to rush any of the development.
Yeah, I think for all we talk about maybe the plot itself, sometimes the pacing feeling rushed, what I like is the character development doesn't feel rushed. There's no sense that Galadriel is a different person by the end of episode 2 as she was at the start of episode 1. Maybe she started learning some things about humans like Halbrand, and maybe she started she's definitely started reassessing things about her quest for Sauron, but she's still fundamentally the same person. And I guarantee when she gets to Numenor, when the Numenorians try and lord it over her, she is going to, and I can't wait we've heard about a scene in the throne room where she announces who she is, and I can't wait for that, that pride of the Noldor to come out. And for me, it's the same with people like Celebrimbor, like, that scene, and I know that I've brought it back to my favourite guy, but and I tweeted about it the other day, but that scene of him talking about Morgoth and the Silmarils, it's not a real Tolkien story, but it feels like it could be. It feels like a story they would have told.
Actually, that is one thing that I can't believe I forgot to mention, is that I know a lot of people who I know who haven't read the Silmarillion, or because there's even without just the core Tolkien books, there's so much lore around every character and every single object in this world that I think the show does a really good job of balancing it for people who have read the books and people who haven't read the books, because you can go into it and understand where you are, who you're with, the story that you're about to go on, and then there were just little references like Elrond name drops Feanor, which I also gasped at. That was just, I wasn't expecting it. And there are just little bits like that for people who know about it will pick up on it, but you don't need to know who Feanor is to understand what Elrond and Celebrimbor were talking about in that scene, which I think is a really good way that they've balanced that.
Yeah, and actually that brings me back to something I was talking about the other day, was that I thought the use of title cards and maps, when you use title cards in a show, it can come across really badly, because it can be like, hey, stupid audience member, I don't trust you, so I'm going to tell you where we are. But this was done in a way that was like, listen, this is a big world, you're meeting a lot of characters, you're meeting places that don't exist by the time Peter Jackson's, trilogy comes around, so if that's all you've ever seen, I need to tell you where you are. But they use the map, for example, to show Celebrimbor and Elrond journeying to Khazad-dûm, and when we got that first shot, I mean, I still think the one that blew me away most was at the end of the first episode, where we were in the Southlands and the map goes across and you see the Sundering Seas, and the transition between that and the actual ocean, incredible. So I think what you were essentially saying there, and I don't think I'm kind of twisting what you're saying, is that the show is doing a really good job of recognizing that, yes, there is this core dedicated fan base of Tolkien fans who they want to please. They're Tolkien fans, they care about it. But they also recognize that the Peter Jackson films were not a success because they adhered to some standard of lore accuracy or dropping a name every 5 seconds. They succeeded because they made Tolkien, and I love Tolkien. Everyone on Tolkien Twitter loves Tolkien. We're all obsessed. Great. But it's very dense and difficult for a lot of people to get into. And so if you're going to make a TV show, if you're going to make a film, the biggest thing you have to do is make it accessible for people. And I think for all my criticisms of, oh no, Gil-galad's ordering about sylvan elves, or, like these lore nitpicks I have, from a show-only watch perspective, I think they've done a great job at making it accessible.
Absolutely. And one thing that I know, I say a lot of people, but I've seen a few people nitpick at, is that this location wasn't on the maps or this location wasn't, and it's like they put everywhere that we needed to know on the maps. And if you are someone who doesn't know any of these places and you're just bombarded with this map full of all these different places, if you tried to put everywhere relevant onto that map, it would just be writing. No one would have any clue what was going on. So they did the best they could to bridge the gap between these hardcore nitpicky fans and people who just want to watch a TV show.
I agree. I think like it's simplifying without dumbing down is the way I would say it. Like, it's streamlining it, but it's not like, you're stupid, like let me grab you by the hand. And I think I actually said on Twitter, and this was before I could talk spoilers, this was after I'd come out of the premiere, I said one of the things that stuck with me was how much the show trusts its audience. Like, it has characters talking about mortality, immortality, themes of love, themes of revenge, greater metaphysical themes. And it doesn't talk down to the audience. It doesn't say, like, oh, let me reduce this for you. Like, that, for me, is what Elrond and Galadriel's whole scene in the path with all the memorials is about. It's like a really deep conversation about what it means to hurt and to grieve, and what it means to be immortal and carry that pain. So there's a feeling to me that the showrunners trust the audience, and that is always encouraging for me. I appreciate that we've gone a little bit over time here. Is there anything else you wanted to add in? I don't want to keep you overly long.
Just before I go, I will add that I can't believe I didn't mention this before, but in that Elrond and Galadriel scene is possibly one of my favourite pieces of dialogue from the entire show so far, and it's when she says something, and I am paraphrasing here, along the lines of, you say I have defeated the horrors of Middle-earth, yet you would let me take them with me, unchanging. And she ends it with this really sarcastic, into the land of winterless spring. And both Morgoth's delivery and the line itself just incredible.
Yeah, do you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up. I think I talked, at least I hope I did. I've forgotten. Making podcasts is funny. You never remember what you said. But I think on my spoiler review, I talked about this exact line because for me, like, that's the heart of it, right? Is that, like, Galadriel, she's not like some hellbent warrior. What she genuinely recognizes within herself is that she is broken inside. And the idea of going to a blessed realm, a heaven on earth with all that pain, that is more torturous to her than anything else in the world. And Elrond doesn't understand this because, yes, he's gone through trauma, but it's a very different kind. And he's very young compared to Galadriel. He hasn't felt the same weariness of time, and he hasn't seen, when she says, "You haven't seen what I've seen," she's not wrong. She's not wrong at all. Like, I loved that opening scene when they were in, the old fortress, and Thondir, who we were all calling Gigwit before the show aired, one of her company, he said, "Oh, we all want to return home," and she said, "No one wants to return home more than me. I can still see the trees when I close my eyes. I can still feel the light on their face." And I just thought, Mordvith, I tweeted this out at the time, I think she just knocked it out of the park. So much of her acting was subtle. But like you say, that line about, I think she says something about, like, unchanging, unbreaking into the land of winterless spring or whatever it is. Oh, just phenomenal.
Yeah, it was just great. And I don't think that there was a bad performance from any of the main cast. Like, they all had me completely sold on their characters, and that's all I wanted. I wanted to be invested, and that's absolutely what I am. I feel attached. I feel attached already, and if anything happens to these characters, we know bad things are going to happen. And I just think the first 2 episodes at their core were to settle, the next however many seasons. They had a really big job, and I think they did it brilliantly. They're aware, of course, things that we didn't like. We've talked about them, but that's just absolutely outweighed by everything that they did right. They were just incredible.
I agree. As you said, not a weak performance in the cast, not a bad storyline. Yeah, there was moments I felt were a bit rushed. We've obviously talked about some of the things we didn't like, but overall, I was just, so impressed with it. I thought it was fantastic. And as you said, it's 2 hours of TV to set up another 48 hours of TV. It's a big job to do, and they had a lot of work to do, and I think overall they succeeded. You know what? I didn't think I was going to do this, but I thought it could be fun, because then we can keep track of this each week. Let's go episode 1 first. What would you rate episode 1 out of 10?
Oh, okay. Out of 10. I don't want to go too low or too high in case, because I don't know what the other episodes are going to be like. You know what? I'm going to play it safe.
You can do 0.5s if you want. You can do 0.5s.
I'm going to say episode 1, 8.5.
Wow. Okay. I think episode 1 for me is a 7.5.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say that.
No, episode 2 is by far my favourite. And the reason I knock a couple of points off is the pacing, is some of the decisions around Gil-galad, around the Sylvan Elves, like we've already discussed, some of the rushed elements there. And I'm also trying to give myself room for the season, so 7.5 feels like a good starting place. So if you said 8.5 for episode 1, what about episode 2?
Solid 9.
Yeah, I'm actually with you. Episode 2, that for me, like, every scene had impact. And frankly, like, I could just go down the list. Celebrimbor's story about Morgoth, what that says about his character. Durin's scene with Elrond, what that says about his character. Bronwyn, I could just keep naming scenes, and they all hit for me perfectly. The only reason I'm not giving a higher score is because we're 2 episodes in, and I don't want to go ridiculous. But yeah, for me, 9 out of 10 as well. Like, I have almost no complaints about episode 2. Beyond some minor quibbles. Brilliant. Well, we're going to keep track of that and see where we go. Anna, any final thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience before we finish for today?
I think my main thing is, we're finally back in Middle-earth, which feels crazy to say, and it's just a really exciting time at the moment to still be able to theorize, about each weekly episode, but also have all of this content at the same time. And it's just a really nice time to be on Tolkien Twitter, not to like, shout it out, but it's just a lovely
Absolutely.
time to have people to talk about it with. And even things like this, I never would have thought a few months ago that I'd be on a podcast discussing my thoughts about the episodes, but it's just a really nice opportunity to get everything out. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed the episodes as much as we did. If they didn't, I'd love to hear why in response to this, because I know people are going to dislike things that I liked or like things that I disliked, which is, one of the good things about the subjectiveness of media. It leaves room for debate, and if it's a fair debate and you have genuine reasons for disliking it, then I'm more than happy to get into that debate with people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, well, I couldn't agree more with everything you said. What a lovely place Tolkien Twitter was. If you're somehow listening to this podcast and not on Lord of the Rings Twitter, I just always assume, how does anyone find this podcast without it? But maybe if you've come across this on Spotify without ever knowing I exist on Twitter, come say hello to us there. We have a wonderful community. We're discussing things every day. We're posting fun fan art. We're talking about theories. We're making memes. We're talking absolute rubbish most of the time, but it's very enjoyable. And yeah, like you said, I'd love to hear what people thought about our criticisms. Are we off base on some of our criticisms? What are your explanations for some of these choices? What are the things you didn't like? We'd like to keep discussing them with you on Twitter. But yeah, Anna, thank you so much for coming on again. Hopefully, if you have time, Anna is going to be returning every week to come and do this breakdown with me, because it's much better to do it with someone as smart and intelligent and as funny as Anna is. So do feel free to bully Anna on Twitter into coming back every week to talk to me. Obviously, if Anna's busy, I'll let her off, but do a fair bit of bullying to make sure that she's not.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to encourage people to bully me on Twitter. That happens enough regardless.
That's true.
Yeah, but thank you for having me again. It's just, like I said, it's nice to have a place to talk about everything, because, one of the reasons I made Tolkien Twitter in the first place is because a lot of my friends in real life don't like it. And I don't want to sit here and bore them with my thoughts. And two, I like talking about something with someone who's equally as passionate, because there's nothing quite like getting the energy back that you give, and you do that, when I'm excited about something, you're excited about something, or you're excited about something else that I haven't thought about, and it's just nice to kind of bounce off people in that way. So yeah, thank you for having me back.
No, absolutely. We're subtitling this the first episode of the Brit Twit podcast, which I've been trying to convince Anna to do. But yeah, Anna, thank you so much for coming on my first ever breakdown of the Lord of the Rings of Power episodes. We're going to be back next week to discuss episode 3, and most importantly, we're going to be back to discuss Anna's number one crush, her favourite widowed father, her future king of Arnor and the earthly realms of Middle-earth, Lloyd Owens Elendil. Get excited.
Prepare for just kind of, I wasn't particularly prepared for today, which is kind of what I like about our dynamic. You come in with the facts, you come in with like the name drops from the Silmarillion. I'm just here. And next week I'm not going to not just be here, I'm going to be a hot mess. So I hope you're prepared for that.
Exactly. That's my real hook to get viewers to come back next time. If you would like to hear Anna making even less sense than she already does, and with maximum derangement, I promise you that we're going to turn it up to 11. And all you other Elendilf lovers out there, come back next week for more of that.
Yes, we needed one Elendilf drop. We had to get it in there.
Exactly. And with that, it's time to cue the music. Thank you so much to Anna for joining me to break down these episodes. As I said at the end, we'll hopefully be joined by Anna each week to discuss the latest episode and have lots of fun analysing what we saw and speculating about where we're going. Let me know what you thought of our discussion on Twitter. Did you share some of the same critiques and concerns we had? Are there other characters you're most looking forward to meeting in future episodes? I'd love to continue the discussion on Twitter, so come over and join us. Also, let me know if there are other types of episodes you'd like to hear from the podcast about the show. It's our first season, and I'm keen to give you the kind of content that you enjoy the most. But for today, that's all we have time for. As always, I'd greatly appreciate if you could leave a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you use. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, make sure you're following Anna on Twitter at MyElessar. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back later this week with my review of episode 3 on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.